Heyo. So I was watching film theory, because I enjoy Matt Pat and I love film theory, and I came across his older Willy Wonka video, and I started to think about it, and the OSHA violations, sure, but the real violation is what he did to the kids, and I wanted to talk about that because that's unacceptable. How? That's no one that I was too lazy enough to figure out. No one has no one discussed this. It's insane. It's idiotic. I mean, yeah, it's an old movie, and you weren't meant to take it seriously. No one was. It's a movie. And then, of course, the sequel came out and didn't really change much that happened to the kids. And you got your old school Disney nostalgia feels and saw a reboot. You didn't get the Disney nostalgia feels because they didn't really start doing that back then. But it's roughly the same feeling. That's why you go see the reboot, is because you saw the first one and you went, oh, they're making a new version of it. It's going to be great. And then it's not. Just like all the Disney reboots that have ever come out. I'm looking at you, Aladdin. Better at not being offensive. Much worse at being entertaining. Having absolutely no clue why we enjoyed the original Aladdin. Having a side story about how thirsty your side character is. I didn't come here to see Genie get all thirsty and hot and bothered for a handmaiden. I came here because I got the nostalgias and I wanted this nostalgias. That's what I came here for. It's not what I got, but that's what I came here for. Obviously, I'm whispering again, as you can tell. It's like 2 a.m, so I'm trying my best not to be too loud, but I am trying to make my voice heard, so my voice might crack here and there. Sorry about that. Anywho, I wanted to talk about certain actions in the old Willy Wonka movie, the one that Matt Pat went over. Again, not the OSHA violations, because that's one thing, but rather the negligence and, I guess, if the reboot is anything to say for Willy Wonka, I guess the kids didn't die. They were injured, so there's that, but still, there's a lot to go over, so just stay with me here. So first we're gonna think of Augustus Gloop. You remember that song? Augustus Gloop, Augustus Gloop, the great big greedy nincompoop. You remember that? You remember that was the reboot, wasn't it? Anyway, the fat kid, the me. I'm Augustus Gloop. I enjoy candy and I'm fat. Anyway, so you look at Augustus Gloop and you just want to look at the original bit. You know, the what happens to him. It's not thinking of the song. We're not thinking about what happened prior with the weird candy forest. Just the exact thing that happened to just Augustus Gloop. So, first he dropped himself into a river of chocolate. And by the way he was swimming, I imagine he can't swim that well. He should just hold his breath and then he'll float up to the top because of all the fat in his body. That's something that I do at times when I'm in a pool. I just hold my breath and then I go, whoa. Because fat floats. I don't know if you knew that or not. Anyway, so you have Augustus Gloop barely swimming. Not exactly a traumatic experience that he was going through. It's more just like, this is kind of scary. But he's a child, so I imagine that he imagined, but my folks are gonna get me out of here, or my mom who's with me, and Willy Wonka will give me some free chocolates or whatever flubbernuck was going on in his head at the time. But they didn't. Even if we escape the idea that Augustus Gloop saw that Willy Wonka seemed not to care that he fell into the river. Next, we get to the pipe scene of that scene. So when you see him go through the plexiglass pipe, you see that his head is up through that pipe. Now, when he was being dragged under the water, when he was being grabbed by the pipe and the suction, of course not grabbed, he wasn't, come here, but, the pipe, the pressure, the negative pressure that's being sucked into the pipe would have pulled the chocolate river that's around him, which would have pulled him down by the bottom first, which would be his feet. So he gets pulled underwater by his feet, or under chocolate by his feet. And sometime, while he's under the chocolate, beneath the surface, he has to flip upside down to go through the pipe so that when he comes up above the chocolate inside the plexiglass, he is head facing up. So in this instance, and when you watch the movie, you can see that in this instance, you can see bubbles rising as he gets closer to the pipe. We'll imagine that at that point, that's when he's flipping upside down to go into it. Given that moment, we can imagine that some of the chocolate river probably got into his nostrils, into his sinuses, and probably down his throat into his lungs, which would probably get him to start coughing. And he gets wedged into the pipe and then sucked through it. Willy Wonka makes a point to point out to the Oompa Loompa that takes his mom that he's headed towards the boiler. On the assumption that he does not make it to the boiler, that pipe is likely still going to take him to an area that is completely closed, no longer an open space like the chocolate river, a completely closed container, already filled with chocolate, given how much chocolate went up the pipe before he did. And then after he gets thrown in there, even more chocolate is coming in. And at that point, you have probably him ingesting more of that chocolate, which has everything that was all over his body, as well as whatever he's adding into it. As we've already learned through the past year, we already know how horribly horrific the germs on the tips of your fingers are, or your fingers in general. But remember that the chocolate that he's ingesting in this instance is a lot more than just the germs in his fingers, because the chocolate is bathing in his sweat, his saliva, the juice that comes out of his eyes, his tears as he cries, because I guarantee you, in a container like that, with more than likely zero light and very little room to breathe, I would imagine he is bawling his eyes out in there, including his piss, because he probably peed himself, his crap, because he probably shat himself, his sweat, his body hair, anything else that he could have added, whatever was on the bottoms of his shoes as he was walking around outside and inside, whatever was on the floor during that point got onto his shoes, got into the river, got up through the pipe, got into the container he's in, and he is now ingesting that. So even if he doesn't make it to the broiler, that is going to be a horrific nightmare he will never forget. the rehabilitation for someone like that would be a nightmare. I can't even imagine how much work it would take to try to get someone like that to go anywhere, not to just panic in a room alone, you know. But fine, that was Augustus Gloop. Let's move on to the next person, Violet. Now, Violet takes a piece of chewing gum she was told not to eat. Not exactly all that convincingly, but, you know, semantics. She pops it into her mouth. She starts chewing. She's having a good time. It's all fun. She's eating some candy in a place with free candy. And she starts to turn deep violet. Violet, you're going violet, Violet. She starts to go deep purple, and she starts to swell, presumably with juice. Now, this is probably the most horrifying bit. Violet probably gets the worst, the worst out of any of the kids in this case. As you could probably tell from when she's, expanding, when she's blowing up like a blueberry. She's blowing up like a water balloon, but they say she's turning into a blueberry, so whatever. As you can see from that scene, when you get a wider shot on her, as well as when they roll her out of the room, she isn't leaking from anywhere. That means that the juice that they have to squeeze out of her has to leave her from an exit that is not already available. Now, whether that comes out orally, anally, vaginally, or they prick her with something to force the juice out, that is going to be an experience where she is gushing, I suppose, blueberry juice out of her body while being squeezed in probably a machine. And she will never forget that for as long as she lives. If she lives to be an age that can suffer from dementia, I promise you that will be the last memory that leaves her. She will be haunted to it. She will be haunted from it until she is no longer able to remember anything. That is what I can tell you for her. Moving on, we get the I forget her name. I'm going to call her Rebecca. I don't remember her name. Leave me alone. The snazzy brat that falls down the egg chute. This can go in a few ways. Now, with eggs, they're brittle, they crack easily, so you have a few options here. For the chute itself, before we even get to Rebecca, whatever her name is. For the chute itself, you can have the chute slowly starts to condense inward so that it becomes a smaller tube for the eggs to be left out of. But of course, given how large the chute is, I'd imagine that changing the angle from straight down to any other angle is going to cause the eggs to crack and likely explode, which would be nightmarish to clean, given how often they're using the thing with the eggs in it, unless it already has some sort of cleaning space in it. The second option is that the vent goes straight down, then changes angles so that it can go into a dumpster, maybe outside. This is not too terrible, but still has the capabilities of spraining, whatever her name was, spraining her ankles, breaking her legs, or just flat out killing her, depending on how she lands on it. She could land on her head, she could land on her feet, she more than likely will land on her feet. But Augustus Gloop showed us that for some reason flipping upside down happens, I guess. So there's that. But in the most horrifying case, that of which the egg chute goes straight down into a dumpster filled with eggs, you have two options in that case. One, the dumpster filled with eggs is filled with enough eggs to break her fall, filled with eggshells and yolk. Enough of these to break her fall. Now, this is an issue because that means that the eggs will pile on top of her as she falls into it. She will likely be panicked and not come to the conclusion that she is in the need to swim. But even if she does get to that conclusion and she swims upward to the top of the egg pile, it's likely going to be in a container that's deep enough so that even if she's in there, she can't climb up and get out. So, of course, she'll likely run out of energy and drown, or she'll just drown in general. But it could be that the eggs are not piled up high enough to break her fall, in which case she breaks her legs, probably dislocates her pelvis. Depending on the angle by which she lands, she could break or even just crack a couple of ribs, probably get a pretty heavy concussion, and bleed out in a dumpster filled with eggs. As more eggs from those other 4 or 5 chutes come down and slam right on top of you. That's sad. Next we go to the main character and his uncle or grandpa? I don't remember who that was. But the main character and the older guy that was with him, they get those fizzy lifting drinks. Now, of course, on camera, in the movie, they aren't injured. But I'm not going to leave that out. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't do research. In fact, I was only thinking about this for about 2 minutes before I even turned on my camera and started to record, but I'm also not a complete idiot. If the gases inside their stomach was hydrogen or helium or something else of that matter, of that make, of that type, the amount that it would have to expand inside their stomach would leave their body and probably so much more before they make any gain off of the floor. Since we don't see that, we'll have to assume that whatever the gas is that comes from the fizzy lifty drink is something negatively heavier. So it is able to rise at a much faster rate and is technically heavier in the opposite direction and is being exerted out of the atmosphere by the gases that surround your body. Now, barring in mind how painful that would be, purely from the need to burp that you would certainly feel, remember that this is all happening in your stomach. And we know it's in the stomach because when they burp, they decrease in the height that they're in, and they slowly get put back to the ground. So we know that the gas is inside their stomach, not their whole body lifting them up. Now the issue with that is the amount of force it would take for something in your stomach to push up towards your liver, towards your diaphragm, towards your lungs, towards your heart, upwards into you, raising not only the stomach, but the rest of your body to fly into the air. I would probably physically dismantle your insides permanently if you didn't get surgery directly after to get everything, reassembled in the right place, which, as you see in the movie, certainly doesn't happen. So, how these two didn't immediately go into shock or don't seem to show any signs of eternal bleeding, I don't know, but magic. Movies. I'm meant to take this seriously, but I take it seriously. Whatever. So, lastly, we get to the most horrifying incident. Not the most horrifying experience, because that was Violet, but the most horrifying incident, which is the TV kid who was shrunk. Now, conservation of mass will tell you that he is not the same going outward than he is beforehand. Now, if you remember the chocolate bar, before the kid jumps onto the little stage, the chocolate bar is being carried by several Oompa Loompas who seem to be having a somewhat tough time holding such a big effing candy bar. It takes so many of them. It's not just an awkward shape that they have to all be together to carry it together. It's huge and heavy. They lay it down on this platform. It gets shot with a laser, and then when it shows up on the TV over there, it's able to be picked up with a single hand, like it's just a candy bar. Now, I would say that it was just an awkward shape for a single person to hold, which is why so many Oompa Loompas had to hold it, and say that it was probably always that light to begin with, if the TV kid's parent didn't pick him up like this. If you didn't do that, I would be willing to accept the idea that the giant chocolate bar weighed the same much as that little chocolate bar, and the only thing that happened was you shrunk it. That's all that happened. But that's not what happened. Yeah, because I can tell, because you're picking a 12-year-old? 13-year-old? I don't know. Like this, with two little fingers. Like he's just a tiny little doll. Which means that he was deconstructed to the size of atoms or molecules, and then reconstructed to a version of himself that's able to survive, but is not made up of the same number of atoms that he was originally made up of when he was deconstructed. And he was about yay big, about yay big when they finished. That's smaller than my head. So he's about the size of a gerbil. And he's still himself, but the size of a gerbil, about the weight of a gerbil, which means that he's missing about 95% of his body mass. So, do you have any idea what you've done to this kid? Because I imagine that this is irreversible. Because again, if he was just shrunk, the parent figure wouldn't be able to pick him up like this. He'd be too heavy, because he would weigh the same much as a regular child. He would just be, condensed into a smaller form. But he wasn't. He's missing something. That's why you're able to pick him up like this. Which which means that the rest of his body is gone. Probably turned into dust, which means that it's an irreversible process. Because if you were to deconstruct him and then reconstruct him back into his regular size, you'd have to add material rather than just subtract material. Material that you probably wouldn't know how to add properly in order to allow him to live. So, bearing in mind the idea that he's capable of living a semi-normal life, the size of a gerbil, he's going to have to deal with a lot of predators from here on out. A lot of predators that would not have perceived him as prey otherwise. Because remember, when you're the size of a person, even the size of a child, you're perceived as more of a threat than as a food to most animals. Spiders, they can't really see you that well, but when they do, they perceive you as this big predator. Snakes, they can see you, and they see you more as a danger than as a food. The big ones that can see you as a food see you more as a potential food, but, it's still snakes, they're different. And, other animals, like birds, they don't see you as a food. They see you as potential food if you're already bleeding out and rotting, and scavengers will come pick you up. But anyone the size of a gerbil is now a prey item for all birds, all snakes, some spiders, depending on where you live, some plants, depending on where you live. And so, yeah. And the sheer amount of money that this family is going to have to pay out to get clothes his size. God. So yeah, that was practically a 30-minute me rambling on at a vocal volume that is probably annoyingly quiet, but I feel like it had to be said. Someone probably already pointed all of this out, but I still feel like it had to be said. Anywho, that was my thought on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. It's 2 a.m, and I'm tired, but not tired enough to go to sleep. I don't know why. Such is life. Okay. Have a good night or day or whenever the heck you watch this. I'm going to try my best to go back to sleep. And now that I've gotten this off of my chest and onto a camera, hopefully this can leave my mind and I can go to sleep. Hopefully, just hopefully. Maybe that's a possibility. I don't know. We'll have to get there when we get there. Have a good night. Bye.